Hello, this is Jan Reinhardt with the BIM Forum. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today, Part 2, AI in the AEC industry, Vaporware versus killer apps. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for listening in and participating. We had a wonderful webinar last Thursday, where we had 4 presenters who gave us case studies of their BIM work. And today we continue with the same presenters, but we concentrate not on the substance of the applications, but how did they start AI in their respective organizations? What mistakes were made? What were the steps? How do they measure ROI? What is ahead of them? What are the things they're watching out for? These are the items that we want to talk about today. So we will go through the room and have our presenters talk about these things. This will probably be half of the webinar. And the second part will be questions that you submit in the chat window and that we will talk about. So I would like to invite you to a lively presentation today, and we'll take it away. Submit your questions, and we will ask our panelists and presenters. We have Walt with Rudolph and Sletten. Walt.
Good morning.
Yeah. We have Scott Yates with VDCO Data. We have Michael Kilkelly with ArchSmarter.
Hey, everyone.
Very good. And Min Song with SBI International. Thank you very much for making time. And I would say we'll take it away, and we'll start with Walt.
All right. Well, good morning. Super happy to be with BIM Forum again this morning and share some of the exciting things and some of the pitfalls that we ran across in our developing our architecture and our approach. I do want to caveat this to say that we are a large corporation. And because of that, we have a lot of concerns about governance and security that maybe a smaller company wouldn't have as much to consider in that way. They don't have as much to lose, so to speak. We are publicly traded, so of course we have to protect our shareholders from things happening that would not be good for our share value as well as our success as a company. So when I talk about things like where do we start, how do we get going, let me go ahead and present my screen real quick here. Hang on, sorry. Can you, just make sure people hooks and see my screen now? Okay, good. Okay, great. So again, this is our approach to building with AI. So how did we go about doing that? Well, we thought first and foremost we needed to make a safe environment. Again, governance, really important to us. We wanted to have an AI interface, one kind of seamless look, because we are a professional organization. We didn't want a lot of ad hoc things bouncing around. We wanted to always focus on a human in the loop process to things. So basically, no decisions made by an AI, all decisions made by a human. That's super important, and it sounds very simple. But when you get into the real edge cases of that difference between a human in the loop versus not human in the loop, you have to pick decision points, little points along the way in your architecture where even though it's not a decision, you want somebody's eyes on it to check that we're going in the right direction. Grounded in our own data. That was super important to us. Obviously, we don't want to be using internet-based searches or what our competitors are using. And secure, like I said, governance is secure by design. And what that means is that we use infrastructure that's already looking at things like row-level security, things that are governed and controlled. If we're using external apps, we use to make sure they're SOC 2 compliant, things like that. So, okay, so what's the first step? First step is understanding what you're doing, who you are as a business, and understanding your capabilities. You hear this term capability map, and it's basically a view or a picture of your operating model and in terms of capabilities. So you build that out, you understand your operating model, and you understand your value streams. Why do you want to do that first? Well, because when you start to innovate, you want to be innovating within an understanding of that existing capability framework. It helps for internally communicating to the business how the thing that you're doing with AI is affecting something you've already been doing. right? Because we've been very successful. We set our best quarter ever, and we're continuing to grow. To maintain that velocity, we want to make sure we keep doing the things we're doing. We just want to do them better, faster, and maybe in some novel ways. But you might be asking, what does a capability map look like? So here's the early draft formation of one. And what you can see here is kind of looking at things in terms of kind of like how your company works. What are the capabilities that we need to have? So first thing you see is there's regions here, right? There's regions of what we do. There's the strategy formation. How do we go about the process of finding jobs and pursuing them? It's understanding the commercial commitments we make with folks. And then you can see each of these different portions. And then there's our actual operational ecosystem. And this operational ecosystem has a variety of things to it: reality capture and production measurement, and some of the different tools we use for that. There's the production, execution, and coordination, and production system design and planning. All these things are part of it. And then probably one of our most important, where we, as a general contractor, is super important to us, is change management and commitment adaptation. How do we change rapidly? How do we use information rapidly? So when we start developing tools within AI, and sometimes they're provided by some of these very names you see on the screen, they are developing AI tools. We now understand how to put them into that framework. And then understanding, some of the more larger parts of the hierarchy, if you will, of the business intelligence, understanding what's happening with meaning. Again, AI accelerates this section extraordinarily well. So that's just a sample capability map. We did revise this. It's gone a couple other steps along the way, but this is an older one. You can see that we had that kind of approach right from the very beginning. So let me go back to the presentation now, and there we go. So then the next step is going to be the aligning of that development to maximize the impact. Again, we did our capability assessment, and then we start doing discovery. What are the things that we could do internally? What are the things we could do externally with our already existing partners? And then again, asking these questions in a very holistic approach, a very business case focused approach. So that helped us to understand the translation of that capability map into the AI space, because we are really changing the way we do our business. Okay, and then lastly is this is actually last. We actually built the foundation as we went, but it's point 3 that you have to have a secure data foundation, a secure environment, and have a very good understanding of these different tools. I literally talk with my CIO and CDO every week, at least once or twice, to go over specific things that we are seeing emerging just in the AI space alone. And then ultimately, the goal is to be able to optimize throughput of what we do. Whatever the thing is that is the throughput item, it could be something related to billings, just simply getting billings put together faster. Throughput is to have that to be able to then, and again, we're measuring throughput by specific deliverable in those cases, but always having that target. That's what keeps us on track, is have that target item that you really want to get to be better. And then that helps you with the next point, which is measuring success. How do you know that you're doing well? Well, if you actually are improving the processes, are you improving the throughput, if you will, on whatever the thing that you're trying to do is? It could be a model sign-off for level 1. It could be a model sign-off level 2. How are we improving what we're doing in our coordination efforts to make that faster? It could be, how are we doing being able to put together a one-time only RFI that doesn't require, like I shared last week, the RFI coach. How do we do that? How do we improve that performance? The data is there. It's available in our systems of record to see that we're trending better, we're improving, and we are. That's the great part of it, is it's actually working in that sense. Okay, so then the last thing I want to talk about is some additional considerations, and this is kind of also where the lessons learned come from. So there's a retrieval augmented generative method of doing AI, right? This is I want to call it a more personal workflow, or a lower threshold for deeper answers and whatnot, because RAG will not, in fact, traverse the entire data set. Even if you give it many files and many folders and many documents to look at, it won't traverse the whole thing. It's going to go through and it's going to prioritize. Probably the best way to look at that is to look at this graphic here, which we built internally. So here you can see on the left side a RAG framework, And on the right side, you see a more thorough workflow. So in the RAG, you're only getting a top number of certain parts that are chunked and part of that that are sent to the actual LLM for inference. So that is problematic because sometimes we need to have the full data set traversed in getting an answer. So what we really wanted to do was build, and if you look at like, this is excellent for reasoning and synthesis. This is simple, like helping people to write emails better, to get through their daily chores together. Personal workflow is fantastic over here. But if you wanted to have something that was a structured approach to change management for change orders or for RFI or submittals or BIM modeling, whatever it is, you want to use a more structured data first approach. So this is where you're going to get answers and we're going to get processes done mostly with our already existing structured data, and then only use inference for things that we need unstructured data or we need a meaning versus a lexical response. So you can see at the bottom, there's really a lot of strengths in building that foundational data layer and then using the AI. So maybe, one of the biggest lessons learned as we started using this kind of internal method with our M365 Copilot, one of the things that was interesting is we had a call yesterday where a young woman had worked on a particular agent she was working on. It had actually found a way into a colleague's personal OneNote. And so she had access to see the entire tree, but just simply clicking on the link. And we're like, well, that's odd because if you look at SharePoint, that's not possible, but it's possible through somehow a backdoor. So we're learning some of those things. You really need to pay attention to what's happening and roll out things in a measured approach. So we're doing this with a small group of individuals and testing these things. So we're catching it now. So when we go live to the whole organization, we don't have those issues. Well, I just want to thank you for the time this morning. And if you have questions, I'll look at the QA later. So thank you.
Thank you, Walt. Great. Scott, you're next.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, Walt's going to make me look bad. He had a prepared slide deck. I'm going to speak more off the cuff. He pointed out the fact, he's come from a large company. I'm definitely at the opposite end of the spectrum. I'm the chief data and AI officer for VDCO Data and VDCO Tech. We are very much a small AEC firm. And he's right. I mean, we obviously have concerns around security, around risk, but the stakes are smaller, certainly. And the challenges are more manageable. Because we're at a smaller size. I think that gives us a huge advantage in the age of AI. There's no question about that. But also, I think there is another factor that ties into our small company size that is an advantage with AI, and that's trust, right? Because something that we're definitely experiencing over the last 8 months is, AI is such an accelerator. You are able to generate so much faster at such higher volume. Things can get, from your people's hands to the customer's hands a lot quicker. And, that means you have to have a tremendous amount of trust in your operators that are wielding this tool. And that is something that I think is a little bit easier to accomplish in a small firm as well. So, we definitely try and leverage that aspect of it. And that actually supplies kind of the basis of what our main philosophy around AI is, and it answers the question of, where I think you start. And that is that we invest in our people at, the grassroots level. I think it's absolutely imperative that, no matter what you're doing from an enterprise scale, as far as implementing AI-based solutions, there is absolutely an education and an experience gap that is starting to be created with people who've had the opportunity to inundate themselves in AI versus not. There's just so many lessons learned through that experimentation that is absolutely critical to finding effective AI solutions. And so where we felt we needed to start was by educating and enabling our people, even independent of specific solutions, so that we were preparing them to be able to receive the tools that we were ultimately going to get them. It's interesting because a lot of the things we talk about with like data security risks and all of that, these aren't new. We've had these before. It's just we're creating a new surface where they are occurring. And so, I don't need to re-educate my people about what sensitive data is or anything like that. But what I do need to educate them on is what this new surface does and how these risks play out on that new surface. And unless you're touching and feeling it, that doesn't really happen. The other thing is, this is where our best ideas come from, is through the experimentation of individuals. They use these tools to make their lives easier on a day-to-day basis. And some of the things they're doing are very obvious utilization wins, efficiency wins, quality wins that we would love to see spread throughout the rest of the company. And so, I've got a whole list of ideas and things that, I'm trying to implement across the organization. But the truth is, and, one of the questions that was out here is, what's your biggest surprise? One of my biggest surprises is where some of the ideas are coming from, and where, what some of our individual people who are not, IT experts, but they are very much experts in their area of expertise, the creative ways that they have learned to use AI to do their daily job. And then my challenge becomes, how do I take that and scale it to the rest of the organization? Apply the filters around security, right? Apply the filters around risk, quality, to make sure that we can consistently reproduce that result that they achieved. So that really is at the core of our philosophy around AI, is that it starts with the people. That is the flywheel. That's what keeps the improvement, increasing exponentially. There was also a question out there that, we were posed coming into this, related to, what are some of the mistakes that you have made? And I'm actually echoing something that I think Walt said very nicely. But, one of the mistakes we made early on was to assume that our processes and our tools were AI ready. That, is hugely important to truly understand the nature of what you're trying to do in a task or a workflow, what the data sources are, what ultimately the outputs are, what does good look like as far as a good output, what are the risks along the way. All of this stuff is incredibly important to understand, because it drives, the myriad of tools you might bring to the table. I mean, another surprise was, much of what we call kind of AI solutions aren't AI at all. They are automations that we could have done before AI, but somehow the paradigm shift into AI has put us in a position to have the, courage to go after those, the wherewithal to go after those, the execution capability to go after those. So that's interesting as well. But it's about understanding the problem at hand first before you just start trying to pile solutions on top of that. So I think, I'll wrap up with what, our core philosophy is, and that's the mech suit philosophy. And the idea here is that we see AI as an enhancer or an enabler, not a replacer. And so everything we do with AI within our organization is, how can we bring out more of the best of our people, not how can we replace our people. And I think that is absolutely critical to success and failure in AI. I think one of the most core elements is, as an organization, if you go into it with a growth mindset, what else, what more, what better are we going to be able to do with AI, versus a very negative mindset of what we'll be able to cut, what we'll be able to replace, what can we get rid of with AI. I think that decision right up front is probably the number one indicating factor on whether your initiative is going to be successful or not. And everything else kind of flows from there. With the right mindset, you're going to find the answers to the challenges. You're going to continue to persist through the roadblocks. And I guess the final statement I'll say is, none of this is magic. I said it last week. Like, AI is an incredible technology, but it's not magic. Every success we've had is an engineered solution where we understood the problem, we understood the outcome we were trying to achieve, and we kept iterating until we got the result that we needed and we could repeat it. So with that, I will anxiously await the Q&A after the others have had a chance to speak as well. I think you were on mute, Jan, if you tried to speak there.
I was on mute. Michael Kilkelly, you're
yes.
next.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So I just want to share some of my thoughts and a little bit about my journey, and also though echo what Scott was saying with regard to, in fostering an experimental approach. So I've looked at AI really from a practitioner's lens, and I got curious about it, started using it, and I sort of joke about how I've had a lot of my best ideas and my best experiences with AI while I'm cooking breakfast on a Sunday morning. And so I think for me, what AI has done and is really reduced the friction in order to kind of test and implement ideas. And I think that requires approaching it with, like Scott said, a growth mindset, and also though with curiosity. And what I've found in my approach is to take an idea and then just start playing with it inside of AI and see what comes with it. Being able to eliminate the friction is great, because you can try out a lot more ideas and see what works. And you can play, you can experiment, and there's not a whole lot of sort of time invested necessarily in it, because AI can be a great production tool, particularly if you're looking at it, from sort of automation and coding, which is typically where I'm coming at it. But you can really, again, use it to try something out. Will this work? And you're not so much worried about, okay, we're going to invest 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 weeks in order to get to that point. You can iterate very, very quickly. So I do think that curiosity and being able to foster curiosity is important. And then allowing people to sort of, use it as a tool. And it is important, like there are security risks, obviously, and it's also important that this isn't necessarily new. So we don't want to be sharing sensitive data with AI, just like we wouldn't be sharing sensitive data in public forums, 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So I think those concerns and that sort of mindset is still important. But we can allow us to sort of imagine and just think creatively with AI as our partner. And I think that's really where you start to get growth and you start to get interesting ideas. Like, I'm not going to come up with all the great ideas myself. So, for me, part of what's been satisfying is, in addition to doing my own experiments, I've been teaching an AI course specifically for architects. And again, the idea is using AI as a personal tool. And that's been rewarding, just being able to see what other workflows people are coming at it with. So it's my approach, again, twofold, is sort of hands-on and then also teaching. And then really a third one in sort of my work with Ulteg is, how does that then fit within the organization, and where are the overlaps between things that I'm working on personally, and then where can that fit into the overall organizational goals. What I presented last week was really one of those points of intersect, where I was curious about whether AI could generate Revit families, and then that actually led into addressing a particular problem we were having with Ulteg with regard to vendor-specific equipment. So, I think we can operate on these different modalities, if you will, going from personal and then into sort of our organizational framework, and approaching it with creativity, with an open mind, and really with a sense of experimentation. So I'll stop there, and I will hand it over.
Min, you're next. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, I'll share a slide. Can you see the screen? Can you hear me?
May take a second. Something's happening. Yes, we are here.
Okay. So hello. I'm technical director at SBI. SBI is a small boutique consulting firm. Typically, we do professional services, but maybe 30% of time or 40% of time we do develop applications. Some of those applications are sold on a subscription basis, but we do also create customized application for certain projects. And With AI, what we are trying to mainly focus is just trying to control the quality of information. So one of the things that we notice is that everyone in our company can use AI, go to ChatGPT, Claude, ask a certain task to be executed, and they get results. But in order to use that information for professional service, those information have to be accurate on a professional level. It means that we preferably will not allow 5% of mistake or 10% of the mistake. But what we notice is that with AI is that when people are using AI on individual levels, AI tends to make mistakes, especially when it's related to hard logic. So if it's related to soft logic, it does have some answers close to some areas, but if the output has to be definitive, the accuracy of the output is not always there. So when you have unstructured data that's coming from the construction industry, which is the left side, on the right side, we have certain use cases that we want to go to. So mainly what we are focusing is to control or harness those commercial AI models. That's what we are trying to do. So when you have a certain unstructured input that goes into the foundation models, when I say foundation models like Claude or ChatGPT, you need to convert those input information into a certain format that does operate better with AI foundation model. And then when the output is generated from a foundation model, how do you validate the output? How do you control the quality of the output? And then here, the time investment is really important because we cannot afford everyone checking every item that has been generated by AI. So we can, there is a certain human in the loop in this stage, but how can we automate that process to improve the quality of the output that's coming from AI? So those are the areas that we are mainly focusing. And with the center part that you're seeing here, the controller of the input, the controller of the output, those are the focus. And to do that work, we do have a library of sub-agents and tools that support in various stages. But where do we start with this? I think in terms of getting people on board on how to use this internally within our company, to be honest, we don't have a good onboarding program yet. I think what Scott mentioned last week and briefly this week is something that we like to try out. In our company, we were just busy, everyone doing their work, building these sub-agents for the loop, but we didn't really have a chance to, individually go out there and come up with their approaches using some of the sub-agents here and share the success story. So maybe like holding bi-weekly forums to share individual success stories. And if it works, spread that out, like Scott mentioned before. So that's something that we really like to try out. So that's a place definitely where you can start from, I think. And then another concern that people have is when they hear about AI, am I going to be replaced? I think that's another concern. One thing that we heard from other company is that when they're training their staff with AI, they stopped using the term AI because when they hear about AI, they get kind of scared. So instead of calling those training programs or onboarding programs with AI in it, just call it optimization or automation, and AI will be only part of it. So that's I think it could be a gentle introduction to the staff that you have. And another thing that we would not like to miss is that with AI, it has so much knowledge in it, but with coding becoming a little less important compared to before, using prompts and skills don't really get you the right answer. So we believe that traditional education, for instance, on cost estimating, procurement, or designing, those are really needed to write the instructions or skills or prompts that goes into the AI model. So we do have new researchers in our company, but without the knowledge on the traditional domains, I think it's very difficult for them to write the right skills and prompts and instructions for AI to execute. So that part is still very important. And another way we get started is that certain people know slightly more in terms of how to use those commercial foundation models. So for the people who do know how to set up a project, they will set up a point of departure. So if you log into a Claude or a ChatGPT, it will have a basic workspace for you to get started. For instance, if you are the task is intended to generate slides, then there is a workspace that already has certain design elements coming from our company and direction of how the slide should be developed. So people can come in here. They don't have to start from scratch. You start from basic project instructions that are already populated. So I think that's another way to help people get involved in this AI process. And then some of the internal debates that we're having is whether to code or whether to wait for AI model to get smarter. So for instance, let's say like 2 years ago when you had AI model, then AI model had very hard time understanding geometry. When you have text information, it really does well with text information because it's a large language model. There is a vision language model, but still the basis is pretty much text. So it does a pretty good job of using text information, but handling geometric information was very, very hard 2 or 3 years ago. So back then, we kind of thought about, okay, for geometric related tasks, we still have to hard code, but that was probably wrong and will be wrong in about a year. We saw from Michael that how AI can interpret photos, interpret different unstructured information, and then start building 3D models, plot the right vertices at the right XYZ coordinates. So that's also starting to happen. So when you kind of juggle between whether we should code for an area that AI is still not good versus whether we should wait until we get the next version of ChatGPT or Cloud model, till now it seems like sometimes waiting might be better than investing too much time to develop something that has not been addressed by AI models. So that's still an internal debate, whether we should internally develop something that AI cannot do or wait for AI models. But till now, it seems like waiting could be one of the good approaches. And then also, another internal debate is whether do we still keep our developers or not. And then there is another area of teaching traditional knowledge, not coding, but just going with skills and instructions and prompts to make a code. That's another approach. But the decision that we have so far is we need both. Yes, you can create web apps and tools with using AI. You may not need to know coding. It will generate apps for you quickly these days. But the fact is that what we have seen is that the people who do not know coding, when you have the output from AI as a tool, they don't know how to debug a certain area. So you might have an AI tool that is a good at starting point, and then as you further develop over time, the tool gets complicated, and there are certain areas that you have to debug. But for people who don't know how to code or don't have the basic understandings of coding, has pretty much hard time on debugging when the tool starts to get complex. So we still need developers. It's just that for the developers, the expectation is higher. So in the old days, like 3 or 5 years ago, you might have a certain development task and you may estimate about 2 weeks or 3 weeks to develop that. But right now, our internal expectation is much higher. If you have a certain development task, the expectation is like that this developer will develop that in half day. So it's, instead of replacing people who has been working with technical skills, it's more of having your expectation higher and having the output from those people to be 5 times or 10 times greater than what it used to be. So that's another internal debate that we had, but the approach that we're taking is, have still maintain the people, but we would expect more productivity out of those people. And then a couple of things that we watch out for is token usage. Advanced models like Fable, they're great. They do very well, for instance, for 3D modeling. Of course, there is some limitations there. It does create the conceptual model, but the accuracy is not there for using AI for 3D modeling. But advanced models like Fable, they do a better job of 3D modeling. But then when you don't watch out for what is spent to do that, then you are kind of hit back with hundreds of dollars. So we had an instance last month where we had a developer using AI models to do some development, and only after about a week we realized that it cost hundreds of dollars. So you need to watch out for token drainage, and to that end, I think there are certain tasks that are fit for less smarter AI models. So if your task is more related to text and documentation, then it's probably going to do a good job with lower tier models. But if your task is related to more advanced tasks like a 3D geometry generation, then you might want to use more advanced models. So depending on the task, the nature of the task, you can start to choose the model that is fit and also effective and cost effective for your task. So that's another kind of mistake or lessons learned from our past. And in closing, a lot of guesses that I had like 2 or 3 years ago are turned out to be wrong. So whatever that I'm guessing right now, what the word might be after 2 or 3 years ago was AI. The guess that I have maybe or probably is wrong. It's just that it's the development speed and pace is so fast, and like I said, it's sometimes better not to invest on hard coding and invest more on or waiting until the model gets better for certain tasks.
Man, thank you. This is very well. Was a very good discussion about the state. I have a question. There are certain things that are more mature with AI than others. Anything that's text-based or writing essays or we're dealing with language models, right? How about the geometry model? This is something that is very relevant for our line of work. What is doable with geometry models as of today, and where are we? Where is the bleeding edge? But what can be done? What is mature? What will never happen? What are the things that we expect in the next couple of months and years? Any comments from the panel here relative to geometry modeling? And maybe a two-part question: geometry analysis, and the second part, synthesis, the modeling of geometry.
I can go first. It's a good question, and one area where, I think we will see a lot of growth over as the models evolve. And certainly I noticed from just within Claude, the difference from Opus to Fable with regard to certain geometric tasks was better, but it comes at a cost. And you'll see your token usage go right through the roof when you start using Fable. But it's still, from my experience, that things that you think should be easy and that are easy for us as humans to identify, like looking at a set of drawings and identifying common features across different views of the drawings. That's something within the AEC industry we're trained to do early on. Still very difficult for AI to be able to discern features in a drawing across different views. And I think that requires on our end, to sort of coach the AI to understand this is the same across, and even identify what a feature is. In what I presented last week, it was very interesting for me that AI was really good as far as computer vision and understanding an image, but like terrible at a drawing. And so, and I think that what is missing though is that interpretive piece that, again, we have that intuitively working in the industry, but we do have to work with the models in order to provide that context. So, for example, we could give them a model, just the raw data of a model, but it may not be able to understand the specific features we're looking for and the relationship between a door to a wall, to a floor, to a column. I think that is that context needs to be provided in some way, shape, or form. I do think it'll get better, but I think that piece, like that connective understanding, is not there. And again, we can provide that in a sort of intermediate step. The way I did that, as I showed last week, was just by really identifying common features, in a 2D drawing and just using AutoCAD layers. That was it. But it took some work on my part to understand that and then be able to adjust my inputs so that I could get a decent output of it. So there's a learning process, I think, yeah.
So for instance, if the task were to create based on pictures and a floor plan or a site plan, a site logistics plan, is this something that AI could do for us? Where do the trailers go? Where does the crane go? What's the reasoning? What is good access? I think this would be a worthwhile task, right? That is we come across as designers and engineers, and there's a lot of consideration that goes into that. Is AI able to help us with these types of things?
Yeah, I think that the AI piece from my side would be just looking at, because again, we're focused on the build and operations production. So for us, it's like, from the workflow with Autodesk tools to those infinitely thin lines that you have in models, to something comparable with reality capture is voxelization, right? I mean, voxels have an opportunity space there. AI helps with the reality capture and turning that in, getting that data into the alignments with those voxels, so you can have that standard voxelized grid and compare for installed quantities, installed items, even recognition of what's installed. So going another step beyond the standard photogrammetry and laser scanning and that sort of thing.
This is definitely an area that I will be watching out for, to see how can we leverage AI to analyze and generate geometry, because this is what we do as designers and engineers and builders and superintendents and so forth. That is definitely there.
The hard work.
There is a question from Lauren Ruth. Anybody using local models? Are we? Is that the thing?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. We absolutely are. We work with several customer groups, like airports, other government entities, and so we started exploring early on, the idea of a local open source, private model that allows us to keep that data secure as we interact with the models. That actually opened up a new business line for us. It's allowed us to actually support legal subject matter expert work, because we're able to process case files through that private local model and validate that we're keeping the data secure through that entire process. So, building that process was really interesting. It was, to secure the data was easy. To prove that you secured the data was a lot more difficult, right? To provide that audit trail and documentation. So I think, for data security reasons, it's incredibly important that, organizations look at this, because, you are going to be up against, that data security roadblock. But I think there's another thing to consider as well. One of my biggest fears in this space is that we're going to get completely dependent and addicted to models like, from Anthropic and OpenAI, like Claude and ChatGPT, and then the prices are going to get jacked up on us, and all of a sudden workflows that were incredibly profitable for us become, not so much anymore. So I've also been looking at private models from that perspective to control our costs, on the usage of these models. I will say one thing, and I think everybody, would agree and understands this. Those models are typically smaller, much, much smaller. They are typically, I'd say, 6 to 8 months behind what's on the frontier as far as capability. So in particular, one of the things I've had to do to create the same workflows we're using with like Claude on the private model is I actually have to build scripting that parses tasks into smaller chunks, parses data sources into smaller chunks, and you have to kind of spoon feed the model, get pieces back, and then reconstruct. So you almost have to take a workflow you already built and then decompose it even another level or two further to be able to spoon feed it through that open source model. Of course, this is improving every day. The models are getting bigger, the context windows are getting bigger. They can run on smaller hardware, so there's a lot of movement in this space. But I believe it is critically important to the widespread adoption of AI that we have more and more access to and capability with open source models. I know that's going to be critical to the future of our firm, is that we have the ability to do that.
I was speaking with an architect who his firm does work on data centers specifically for AI software companies, and they are forbidden from using, it's written into their contract, they actually can't use any AI. Or they can't use any public, any of the frontier models. And so they were looking specifically at open source local models so they could realize some of the benefits of it, but not, jeopardize their contractual obligations. But I thought that was really interesting.
This is almost like the executives of Google don't allow their kids watching YouTube videos,
Sure.
right? This is
yes, because they know. Yeah.
They know a little bit too much. Let's see. Any failures where you had hopes and had to course correct? Any thoughts on that? Mistakes, lessons learned, something
I'll
delay a little bit, or
I'll jump in here as well. So I presented last week that we had 2 second brains fail before we finally had a second brain that had some success for us. And it goes back to what I said in the opening about, really understanding a process and the, AI readiness of the process and a friction that's in the process. The first 2 second brains we built, there was just too much friction on the first one in getting information. Well, really the issue with the first one was we didn't know what we wanted to capture in a second brain. So we were just kind of dumping stuff in there. And when we tried to get any usefulness out of, an agent paired with it, it was nothing useful because we didn't really have any deliberate thought about the data that was going in the front end. So in the second iteration, we addressed that issue and we were much more specific on what we were trying to accomplish and therefore what data we were going to put into it. But the friction to get the data into the machinery was too much. It just wasn't getting done. We check in a week later, 2 weeks later, and we're just not doing it because it's another thing to have to remember to grab the file, get it to, a particular place. And so, with that iteration, we learned that the surfaces of how the data flows in and flows out are really important. And so with the third brain, we really focused on how can we get passive data capture of the right data into the brain. And so, we address, now we were getting the right data. Now we were getting the data passively. And now all of a sudden, this was a really useful tool because it was accumulating the knowledge we needed, and it was readily accessible to us and surfacing it in good places where it was really helpful. But, that was not, it's incredibly difficult to sit at the beginning of that journey and know exactly what that final design needs to look like. This is why I go back to, empowering people and experimenting and having scouts is so important, because we had to go through, I think, those iterations to learn those lessons. But now those lessons apply to everything we design, right? Now we know, like, are we really focused on what the data is that's needed for the solution? Are we really focused on the surfaces for how we get data in and out of it, right? So with every iteration we do, we're adding something to the playbook for the next solution, to get at a better design.
As AI tools mature, how does the organization approach the build versus buy decision for project management software, especially solutions that mainly digitize existing workflows versus AI native tools you develop in-house? What factors most influence your choice? So interesting question. So now we don't need to buy software anymore. We can create our homegrown version of the tools that we are paying for today. And they will probably not be as perfect at the beginning, but there's a huge opportunity of tailoring them to the specific needs that we have in our organization, that the traditional software vendor may not be interested in providing a solution for, right? Interesting question. Are there any data points that you have where you replaced an existing system with an AI tool? Not yet?
So I was going to let some others speak, because I think we're in a little bit of a unique position. I mean, obviously, I'm at a smaller firm than the other folks on the call, and it kind of goes back to the philosophy I was just talking about. One of the things and it was mentioned earlier, one of the things I think is really interesting about AI is its ability to allow you to experiment very cheaply, right? So, kind of the base approach, and we don't do this everywhere, but kind of the base approach is, let's try and build it first. If for no other reason, it helps us understand our requirements. We used to sit in a workshop with a blank whiteboard and go, what do we want to do? And start like whiteboarding out the process and the requirements and all of this. But with AI, you can actually just try and build it. Here's my idea of what I want to do. Just build it. You have no intention of implementing that particular product that you just generated, but you get to a vision of what you need and what you want a lot quicker. So for us, the process is to experiment like that, to develop the solution that we need. And then the decision isn't, it's still a build versus buy decision, but it's really more do I scale this thing I already built? Do I harden and scale and want to maintain this thing for the next few years? Or, is that opening up a can of worms where there's something off the shelf that can do the same thing, and I'd rather just kind of outsource that piece of it? And so it's
sorry.
Go ahead, please. No, that's kind of the approach we're taking now.
That I agree 100% with that, because that's exactly what we're doing too. I would say this from the software side. It's tough. I mean, like literally to be a software vendor today, there's a lot of companies are like, wait, pause. Like, what do we even want to get? I'll say one thing for sure. MCP servers. If you give us the capabilities, let us have access to those AI tools. Let us use your bundle, if you will, of API. Let's use that for AI purposes. But we want to construct it in our system. We don't want to do everything in your system. I mean, this is, if I was talking to a certain vendor, I would say that. It's not that we want everything in one, we don't want to be beholden to everybody, but we want your capability and we want your system of record. So if you have a thing that you can do and you provide a system of record that's secure and that is customer facing. So my problem, my data is in a lockdown mode. My IT department doesn't want to let anybody in. So I have to share information with all these large healthcare providers to be connector between our two organizations. So if you could provide your platform as a solution, I'll give you an example, Reporting Hub. Reporting Hub has an excellent solution for Power BI type things. Just that's a non-AI thing, but then they added an AI feature set to that now that we need to host the BI in that environment. But agree, again, we want to try things out and then see what works for us, because software vendors often build that works for everybody, for Turner, for DPR, for everybody, not just us, right? And so we can build what works for us. If you called and said, we have this solution, how can we tailor it? How can we create MCP capabilities? Yeah, now we're talking.
Well, we have 2 more minutes here, and this is a very positive note, because there's an element of democratization of the tools. The users are being put more in charge and in control of things. That's great. I'm jokingly always said that the big software vendors ask us to give them all of our data so that they can rent it back to us. Now we can develop tools that we can take ownership of that. That is my experience. This is very good. I would like to thank all the panelists. I would like to thank all the participants in the audience here in this webinar. Great questions, great answers, very stimulating. I see this as a beginning of a conversation that we will have a lot more of. What I have uncovered is that there is a lot that has been accomplished, but we are by far not done. There are still a lot of frontiers that are worth uncovering and developing, and this will be with us for quite a while. And but also, what was quite remarkable, traditional skill sets are still in high demand. We are not going away as a human race, and maybe the one thing that will help us is the ability to ask good questions. AI can provide good answers, but we need to ask the right questions. And that's one of the takeaways that I had written down here in my notes. The webinar will be online. We would love to stay in touch with the people who participated here. We will do more of this in the future, but I would like to say thank you to everyone, to the people at the BIM Forum who organized this, to the panelists, to the audience, and I would say let's say goodbye, but we'll see each other soon, and be safe, and thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you.
Take care.